Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, all of our members and community that is joining us here today. My name is Susan Moore. I'm the Community Engagement Manager here at IIBA, and we are really excited to have you because it's International Failure Day. Did you know that? Well, we're pretty excited about it because as we were chit-chatting before you guys, as you guys were joining us, you know, failure is a little bit of how we've got to this point in our career, and I don't think there's any shame in that. In fact, what we do as business analysts, we hopefully help to avoid some of that, but also when it's happened, we are also part of that team that takes a look at what did we do wrong and then how can we adapt to do things better. So we're going to be talking about that with this fantastic panel of guests that we have here. We've got Emily Midgley. Emily is from our IIBA chapter. She's the president, so we're happy to have her. We've got Tamara Kopel. Tamara is president of our IIBA Kansas chapter, and I'm going to give her a little shout out because she's also America's Central finalist for Volunteer of the Year. So big shout out. And we also have Imtiaz Kaderboy, who is, I think, your director of operations with the UK chapter. And I also want to give a shout out to our UK chapter because they are up for as a finalist for our Marketing Excellence Award this year. So lots of things, lots of big things going on with our chapters. We might get a chance to talk more about specifically what's happening at those chapters. You will see that I've got this QR code here over my shoulder. If you are not a member, zap that and learn more about the benefits of membership. We've got tons of resources, tools, templates, things that you can use to help you to achieve success in your projects right here. And if you're a member, I want to thank you for joining us today. Members get to attend events like this, but we've also got exclusive webinars and different ways for you to learn and network with each other. So before I get started here, I just want to let you know, keep talking to each other in chat. So we love it when you guys talk to each other over there. If you have questions, you can put those in the Q&A box. We're going to take questions at the end, and then we've got reactions turned on. So if you're in a browser version of this, you can let our speakers know if something they've said really resonated with you. If you're feeling it too, use those reactions. All righty. And so I sort of gave a quick introduction of you guys, but Emily, you want to say anything else? I'll do a quick little round robin here and let you guys speak.
I'll just say I'm in the Cleveland chapter. So I'm the president of the Cleveland chapter, and Cleveland's a city right on Lake Erie. So that's one of the Great Lakes in the United States. And yeah, I've been a BA. I don't even count anymore. Somewhere between 15 and 20 years. I should be better at math, but at this point it's okay, it's been a while. And I failed a lot, but I learned from it. So we'll talk about that.
Yeah.
Imtiaz, how about you?
Speaking of failure, I don't know if you just saw me a second ago. The batteries ran out in this mouse. I put myself on mute and I was going to unmute myself and the mouse just stopped working. So failure happens constantly, right? So how you react, I think, is a key in often these situations. And probably like most, I've run some really bad workshops, some really bad interviews. I've still got my first data model, which I keep just as a souvenir from how bad it was. But yeah, hopefully over time they're a little bit better, and they actually work when they're developed against. But I think we will have to fail a few times to really learn and to get it right. So yeah, let's talk about it and
yeah,
make
I think we got to embrace that. Tamara.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Tamara Koppel. I'm from Kansas City, also in the geographic middle of the continental United States. Really proud of our chapter. We just got done with our first professional development day a couple of weeks ago. But my body's reaction to releasing all that stress is that I picked up a cold, which I'm just now getting over. So if I stay on mute or I go off camera, it's because I'm coughing. So We little bit of grace.
Duly noted. All righty. And so we also have Jenny that's joining us today, and she is going to help with moving the slides along. All right, so Jenny, we are ready for the next slide. Again, just what are we going to talk about? Well, we promised you 9 techniques. We're going to talk about 9 techniques, but maybe not in the way that you thought we were. So there you go. And then finally, we're going to take some questions at the end. So, all right, so Jenny, on to the next slide. So let me set this up for you. So when you guys took a look at those 9 techniques, they probably seemed a little all over the place. And you might have been thinking, okay, why these techniques? How did these specifically help to reduce risk? And so as we were taking a look at those 9 techniques, we wanted to take a step back because the techniques alone don't ensure that you can reduce risk or avoid failure. But really, what will help you to do that is to make sure as you're doing your business analysis planning that you are thinking about ways that you can use techniques in order to help you avoid, look for risk, or learn from it. And so as we looked at those 9 techniques, really they fall along these 4 categories, which is a little bit of a life cycle. So today, as we're talking about these techniques, first we're going to talk about techniques that help us with current state analysis. We'll then take a look at ones that assess and analyze possibilities for the future and why that's an important way to think about techniques. Techniques that help us to set expectations and why that's important to avoid failure. And then finally, we're going to learn from our past mistakes to address the future. All righty. So we're going on to the next slide, Jenny. And so this first question I've got is for Emily. And Emily, sometimes we hear that we don't need to assess current state. I have been on that project many times where they said, we're going to change the whole thing. We don't need to take a look at what we're doing today. And I know you've been there. And that belief can set us up for project failure for sure. So we've mentioned interface analysis as one of the types of current state analysis techniques. So how does assessing current state help us reduce failure?
All right, so assessing current state, like you said, Susan, very, very important. Knowing what the change is and not just saying, hey, we're going to do this thing. Super important to know what the change is. So I'm guessing many of us on this call know that the BACCM, the BA Core Concept Model, has change as one of the key elements in it. And I think like just in the last several weeks, there was a webinar, and I'm going to toss this link into the chat, to using the BACCM as a canvas type thing to really help you think through what are all the different things that we need to look at. So I love that tool. So thumbs up for people who had worked on that. But yeah, change is super important. You've got to understand, like, how is this better than the current state or what we're doing right now? Because it is so much effort for us, like as humans, to make a change. Even, you know, the way I do something at home, the route that I take in the grocery store. So it's really important to understand the current state, and that's not wasted time. So interface analysis specifically. So as we've got on the screen here, this is all about like, how is information exchanged? So an interface is anytime you've got 2 things kind of bumping up against each other. So here in Zoom, we've got a user interface. So I'm getting information by reading the screen, by looking at people's faces. You are clicking on things. We are reading the chat. So just where did things come together? And a lot of the time we think about it in terms of like databases or maybe different layers of a system, and how are they exchanging information, and what are the correct data types, what's expected between all of these different layers and systems. So and really that's important because things are most likely to break like on a boundary between one thing and another. So take a look at like what's being exchanged. It could be people talking, it could be APIs sending data back and forth. Think about like, what's the volume, what's expected, what's a crazy thing that might go in there, and what problems might that cause. your people, your friends who are testers and quality assurance type people are amazing at that, because they always think of scenarios that like we don't think of. So like I tried to pay in dollars. I tried to pay in Canadian dollars. I tried to pay with a ham sandwich. I wouldn't think of all of those, but you know, your testing friends might. So yeah, interface analysis. I know everything's a ham sandwich to one of my tester friends. Who knows? So interface analysis, super important. Other current state techniques, so many of them. There's document analysis. There's our traditional like interviews, observations. And then what I seem to rely on all the time is just go and use the system. So sure, we're awesome at describing like how things work. We like to look at our documents, but you can't beat just go in there, mess around in a test environment, hopefully, and see how things really work. Other current state techniques you might be thinking about, like how is this change going to help, going to impact people? So in that case, you want to think about organization modeling, stakeholder analysis. How might people react to us changing their world here? So lots of different things that you can kind of look at there, but I don't know, nothing beats really kind of going in and getting your hands dirty. Because as much as like as BAs, we rely on documentation. We like to create documentation to help people understand the systems. But we also know that it can get out of date probably a little sooner than we would like.
You know, I think it's a great reminder that current state analysis is not one thing. It's a category of things. And we always need to be thinking about how can I know what is currently happening. I like that suggestion of if you're looking at a system, if you're doing interface analysis, go into the system, use the system, try the system, right? Don't just rely on secondhand explanation of what the system does, because that's probably the way you're going to miss something. I don't know, Tamara or MTS, do you want to add anything on the current state analysis approach category?
One of the big things that I use, one of my go-to techniques is always process. I am big on activity diagrams, because usually your interface is being used as part of a process that involves a series of tasks that result in an outcome. So helping to, I use process mapping to help me understand how the interfaces supply information back and forth to each stage of that process. And it also becomes the underlying roadmap for gap analysis, which happens next and is a big go-to of mine, which is also to figure out, what do you like about today? Even if we said we're going to chuck system A and replace it with system B, and we're doing that at my work right now, we're replacing an antiquated CRM system with Microsoft Dynamics. But that doesn't mean that we're going to reinvent the wheel and all of our processes over and over. We have to go through a very detailed analysis to understand what works well in our current system that we don't want to give up when we move over to Microsoft Dynamics. What does Dynamics have to do for us? And then what can Microsoft Dynamics do that the current system can't? So all of this builds on each other, starting with that interface analysis as part of process mapping, which leads to gap analysis, which is then all tools that help you identify where do we need to go, and that goes to future state, which I think is out of scope for this conversation.
That's right. MTS.
The only thing I would add to all of that really is putting ourselves in the shoes of the people doing the work, doing the job, right? As is more than just collect sheet, pick a product, put product on pallet and send it on its way. Right? It's all about the people, the emotion, the empathy, the compassion. It's more than just a function, right? So putting ourselves in the shoes of the people we're working with and understanding exactly what they do, how they do it, how they feel, who they interact with, enables us to really understand the current state more, with more depth than just the functional element, and puts into play that human element, which is equally as important, I personally think, especially in today's world when we're kind of online and sometimes that human touch can be lost in that human experience.
I think you're speaking my language. I think you also want to understand in the current state, how do people feel about the way they use it? Are they positive about it? Are they not feeling positive about it? Because I think that can inform where you go next. And so let's talk about Imtiaz, where you might go next. So we've thought about this current state. And so our next slide here, next question is, and I'm going to put myself in this category because I am one of those people that when I start a project, I get really worried about all of the different things that can go wrong. And I just want to let you know, if you're one of those folks who thinks about everything that can possibly go wrong, there's a whole category of techniques for you. You can put that to good use. So our next category is about analyzing things that might happen in the future, either so you can avoid them or mitigate them. And so Imtiaz, how can these techniques help us to reduce failure?
Yeah. The first thing I'll say, I used to hate risk meetings. Right? Couldn't see the point of them. And I think when I got to be a bit more experienced to the BA, I think it struck me that it was an Excel process, right, of looking at numbers as opposed to really analysing the words on the paper, right? So the risk of COVID, right, I guess the biggest one we've all faced in the last few years. In the UK, it kind of lockdown happened March 2020-ish. And I guess if you look 6 months prior to that, how were we assessing that risk? Who was actually doing that impact assessment? Whether it was number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4, who was actually doing that impact assessment and actually really articulating the impact of COVID in this case, of if it would hit, what the impact would be. And who was really, not only, I don't believe I should own a risk, but actually who was saying the countermeasures and analysing the things that we think we need to do, right, once this risk becomes an issue. And not just thinking, well, it's a system thing, buy a few laptops, get broadband, job done, right? The impact, as we just discussed, pop it, load of models, right? That holistic approach, thinking about the impact on people, on process, on the business. So risk, predicting the future, hard to do, but if we're going to put risk down, actually as a BA, think about them, because it's going to affect principally the value and benefit that I've outlined or helped to outline in the business case, through each and every requirement I've written, through each and every process I've written. And if some of these risks actually come to fruition, right, there's going to generally be negative impacts, which is going to impact my benefits and my value that I've agreed with my stakeholders, people I'm working with. So yeah, risks for me now a great way to think about the future, but really actually the extra touch of analysis, again, for me, really important.
I think often we as business analysis professionals often think, well, thinking ahead about risk and issues, that's really what the project manager does. But I actually, in the projects that I've been on, either when I've been solo, not with a project manager, or working closely with a project manager, I have found the business analyst voice to be so helpful because we can dive a little bit deeper, and we can move from just brainstorming a bunch of things that might happen to really going and assessing if that could happen. So I don't know, Emily or Tamara, do you want to add to any of the techniques in this category, or maybe a technique that you think might be missing in this category?
I was going to say, we're using a lot of what if scenarios in our current project. I said we were moving from an old CRM system to Microsoft Dynamics. And this is a multi-year BPR process. We can't get everything done at the same time. So we've had to think through some manual scenarios. What happens if we move person A onto the new system and inactivate the record in the old one, and then they do something that causes that record to be reactivated. How are we going to handle that? What if a person who's been migrated onto the new system wants to do something, sponsor a child, for example? I work for a nonprofit, sponsor a child, and that functionality is not ready for them yet. How do we serve that sponsor manually while we are waiting for the functionality to be implemented? And part of that risk analysis is, how likely is this weird scenario to happen? And if it is very likely to happen, that becomes something that then we prioritize into the functionality, and that feeds other things. That feeds our backlog and what features need to go in first versus second. But when we finally get down to that last 20% of edge cases, right? You build for the 80%, and then you try and plan for the 20. And it's where that 20% lives that you have those weird what if scenarios and plans for how to address them. That is your use cases and scenarios, and then your risk analysis. If this happens, then what are we going to do, and how likely is it? And how you respond to that depends on the impact.
Yeah.
And similar to problem analysis in a way. And I didn't do this early on in my career, brainstorming, ideas, right? Ideas coming in. Whose idea is the best? Is it the person who shouts the loudest? Is it the person with the best suit? And now I'm in the mold, similar to a problem, right? I'm challenging people on the idea they create. What need is it satisfying? What benefits is it going to create if we choose this idea? What assumptions can we make, but also the external world, competition and any external factors that will help or hinder this particular idea from coming into fruition. So actually sort of, challenging people on the problem or the benefits they come out with in brainstorming sessions, just helping us think through the ideas properly and making sure they actually will add value if we do decide to choose it.
Emily, did you want to add anything?
I was debating, but yeah, I wanted to add one small thing so thinking through use cases. So often you may have, as Tamara described, there's a set of use cases, and like, what if this doesn't work? What if that doesn't work? So again, that's where your quality assurance, your tester type friends can be so useful in there. They're always useful, but they're really good at asking questions like that. In my more recent work, we've shifted more to writing scenarios in the acceptance criteria of requirement story cards, however you outline the work to be done. And yeah, the scenario-based situations can be really helpful for us. And if you can sometimes it makes sense to make a table. What are all the different levers that could possibly be pulled? And what happens in this combination of inputs or whatever there is. So sometimes just viewing your scenario or your use cases a little bit differently can help you see some other combinations or some stuff you wouldn't have thought about either. Because that, maybe it could be a really big risk. Maybe it could be, oh, wow, we don't have any data validation to prevent that situation from happening. Like, okay, maybe we need to evaluate that and see what kinds of things it could cause.
Yeah, as you were saying that, Emily, I was just thinking that, use cases and decision analysis, because you can put those in visual models, you can start to see, and you can start, and take the steps through, and what will happen if, and I didn't think about this. So you go from brainstorming all the things that could happen and go wrong to analyzing the risk so that you can prioritize that, and then start to visualize what you would do in those instances. So I think that's how that category of techniques really works together to help you think ahead and look for future problems. All right, so let's move on to the next category, and this is around setting expectations. And when I was thinking about this one, Tamara, I was thinking about my husband. He started his career as a developer, and I'm sure many of you on the call know about test-driven development. So the idea here is that you write a simple test case, and then you write your code to make that test case pass. That's test-driven development. And in my mind, that is an easy example of how you can set an expectation and meet it. And so in this category of techniques, Tamara, we've got acceptance and evaluation criteria. We've also got, I know one of your favorites, financial analysis. Not really. But how can using techniques to set expectation help us reduce failure?
Well, I'm going to flip it first and talk about the acceptance and evaluation criteria. Even if you're not in an agile world, it's useful to think about things in terms of what is the definition of done? What does it mean when this feature works? What should it do? How should it look? How long should it take? And so setting up a conversation in advance, and user stories with acceptance criteria are designed for this, but it can work in waterfall too. Setting down and saying, this is what we should be able to do with the whole team, gets everyone on the same page. From the business perspective, they understand this is the outcome that we are looking for. From the developer perspective, they understand I have to build component A and B and C and D. And from the testing perspective, they know enough to be able to build scripts off of it. So I like to go through that definition of done exercise to say, when this is finished, I should be able to set up a new account in the system. I'm going to use the example of a sponsored a child. I should be able to select a child from the system based on the sponsor's stated requests, assign that child to the sponsor, and establish a relationship between the two. Now, it's more complicated than that, but for purposes of a webinar, we'll just leave it at that. That's the kind of thing that we want to talk through. Susan mentioned financial analysis because I never thought about that one before, and it's not one that I have frequently used. This only came up for the first time in my career very recently. And we have a scenario where our agencies in Delhi receive letters from children, and they are written in the local languages, in the local dialects, which are not Western Latin scripts like our usually American sponsors are used to seeing. So when a child writes a letter, it's kind of cool to see it written in their original language. How do we represent that when we're showing it to the sponsor? So we were going to evaluate an external vendor who had the capability of translating the original dialect into something that was representable in a PDF. And we were going to pay X amount of money for this. And we started going down this path and thought it was fairly reasonable. But then they came back to us with, once we actually gave them our numbers and volumes, and they said, it's a lot higher than you thought it was, which gave us pause. And we thought, oh, wait a minute, why is it this expensive? It was just about that time that a brand new developer who had a different skill set came on board, and he said, had you guys thought about using headless Chrome? I think we can do this. I have no idea what headless Chrome means. But long story short, he found a very cheap way of doing exactly what we needed to do without us having to buy a third-party tool, implement it, install it, and all of that. So in this case, the financial analysis really saved us a lot of money. But it also gave us an opportunity to go back, because we were moving on to a cloud-based architecture. Then we started asking other questions. Well, how many, at what point of how many records do we have before we have to buy more storage? How much is that going to cost us? Depending on how many people we have in the system at one time, that takes up something called RUs, which is basically, how many people are hitting it at the same time, and at what point does that frequency cause us to need to purchase more CPU processing power, and therefore that costs us more money. So I started asking a lot more financial questions. The short end of this story is, when I went to the VP of information technology, he said, spend what you need to spend, just keep it reasonable. Okay, well, that explains a lot why I haven't ever run into financial analysis before, because so much is built into our operational expenses to begin with. I just needed the new perspective of someone who'd never asked me those questions before to say, oh yeah, I wasn't thinking about that. So I'll at least be asking those questions in the future.
I think we often think that our work is just about talking with stakeholders and understanding their needs. Sometimes we can have a very big impact on their needs when we dive into the financials of something they've asked for, and we've said, I know that you think you need this. I just want you to understand the cost of it, or the cost of not taking an action or taking an action. So while we sometimes think about financial analysis, again, as something those project managers do, man, that stuff is all over their certification. In fact, we also can do that and make that a part of the work that we do. So Emily or MTS, any other stories about techniques that set expectations?
I just wanted to reiterate the outcome, and how in your story, Tamara, the outcome is what was really important there. And sometimes if you don't focus on that, then you can have some failure. So if the objective had been, hey, we need to buy this tool, or maybe the objective, I'm dating myself here, maybe 30 some years ago was, we want to get this new formula for Coca-Cola out to our customers. And we got to roll it out. We're going to have the new Coke. It's going to be amazing. Oh, guess what? If the objective was rolling out new Coke, they got it. If the objective was the outcome of, we want a great tasting beverage that we know our customers will love, or in Tamara's example, we want our sponsors to be able to understand what's important to the kids who they're sponsoring, that's what we want. So think about your outcome. Yeah, maybe not so much your the output, or the thing where you're just trying to get something out the door. So similar, like taking training itself isn't necessarily valuable. What are you learning from that training? So outcomes.
Keeping laser focused on what is the outcome we're going for here, and what problem does that solve? What opportunity does that let us take advantage of? And then not getting hung up on the how we're going to get there. And I'm just so grateful that this new developer came on the team when he did, because none of us knew what that technology was, and he did. And it's like, oh, wow, this is great. So it's a team.
Yeah.
It takes a team.
MTS, did you want to add to that?
Yeah, just really, I mean, the whole outcome thing is so important, I think, because outputs tend to be more functional, right? I want something stored on a database. I want, but the outcome begins to include customer value, emotions, perceptions. And like you just said on the Coke example, when you tweak the outcome, you then think about the end business solution in a more holistic manner and delivering a real, positive outcome for the end customer, and takes into account more than just function. And just going back to the thing about techniques, I've done rich pictures before and just shown, the current situation and what the situation is going to look like when we deploy the business solution. And I've done it visually and quite graphically, and sometimes with an element of humor and emotion. But again, it just makes people think about the end human state of whatever it is you're going to deploy. It brings it to life, and personally find it more engaging and helps collaboration.
Yeah. Well, let's move on. We've got one more set of techniques here. And so these come at the end typically, but I guess you could do any of these techniques whenever. So Emily, it's a really good practice. Honestly, I think all of us are where we are in our business analysis careers because 1, we failed. 2, we acknowledged it, and then we learned from it, right? So that's how we got to where we are. but that also works for projects too. So tell us a little bit about how business analysis can be helpful in the process of learning from our past mistakes.
So I think I said in the chat, and I don't know if I said it out loud yet, that it's only a failure if you don't learn from it. So this is, what did you learn? And it's not just knowing like, okay, we learned this thing, maybe we talked about it as a project team, but so I work at a very big company. It's also super important to share that. So maybe you share that with other BAs, you know, maybe you share it in some kind of forum that exists. Maybe we share in forums like today, just across industries, across the world. So sharing that stuff is really important too. Let's see, and I tend to think of things from an agile perspective. So I'm very much an agile person. So I think of lessons learned sometimes it's like, oh, the project ended, and after 3 years we have all this lessons. So for me, it's like, okay, let's do this frequently. So early and often, let's inspect and adapt. Like the sprint model that we have with most agile frameworks is great because maybe we're only going in the wrong direction or slightly off course for a couple weeks at a time. But this frequent checking in and saying, okay, what's actually happening? How did things go well that we keep up? Did anything not go so well that we can improve on? Yeah, retros, I'll probably talk more about retros a little later, but I feel like if a team is good at doing that, so in Agile, you call it a retrospective, otherwise you might call it lessons learned. If you're good at that, you can overcome anything at all. So if the team is really great at taking a look, an honest look and a brave look at what could be better, you can fix just about anything that's going on. I could talk
used a
about
good
that all
word
day.
there. And you used a good word there, bravery. I think courage is really what's needed in both of these for root cause analysis as well, even though I know that tends to be looking back at what went wrong, but that takes a certain amount of courage in order to do that. And so MTS, I feel like since we've hit on this human emotion and you're that guy today, what do you want to add about that?
Yeah, I think I've been in, I'm not going to say pure agile worlds, but agile and waterfall projects. And without the culture, without the people, you can deliver software, right, in an agile world. And I've been in quite humanless environments. But if you haven't got the people who've got the courage to take a risk, the courage to be honest, the courage to want to improve and work together as a team and take accountability, like a lot of these exercises can end up in hot air, end up in a lesson logged or a retrospective where you take notes and you park it, but don't actually have and your word courage is actually a really powerful word, have the courage as a team and as a set of human beings to actually, influence change and make things better.
I think business analysis professionals can be that role model for courage in these kinds of things, because we can help to lead the group with facts instead of letting them get wrapped up in the emotion of whatever it is, embarrassment or shame or whatever. We really help them to do the deep dive into the let's assess what went wrong. Let's look at the facts and let's see what we can do about it better. Tamara, do you want to add anything on this one?
Failure, the idea that this is International Day of Failure implies that something has already happened that we need to learn from. And I think the point of this conversation is to say we have lots of opportunities before we get to the end to keep things from going to a bad place. And that's what I've learned. I'm totally on board with the idea of root cause analysis. We do that all the time. Lessons learned is something that our team is really trying to focus on and saying, what are we going to do differently? We just got done with our retro for KC Bad last night as a board team. And, so there's always something that you can tweak and do a little bit differently. And then I guess the final thought, and I forgot to put this in, I'm going to backtrack just a little bit. One of the the frame of mind that has been presented to me as, and I'm going to say this as a nonprofit, so this frame of mind might be a little more difficult in other circumstances. When we were talking about what are we going to spend on this third-party tool, one of the questions we asked ourselves is, that's an administrative cost that prevents us from sending direct aid to our kids, to our sponsored kids. So the question is it worth spending, and I'm pulling a number out of the air, $20,000 on this tool when that $20,000 could fund 10 scholarships for some of our kids to go to college? Is that worth it? And so in my business, in my line of work, there's still an extra consequence of thinking, okay, what is the impact of this? And have we really explored all our alternatives? What is the impetus to go a little extra farther and say, how can we make this a little bit better? Because the more efficient that we get, the more opportunities we have to avoid the failure or to mitigate it so that it's not as bad as it could have been, and move forward.
I think it's you are reminding me of a couple of things. So first, it is don't wait until the end to do root cause analysis or lessons learned. Make that the way that you work. We had Rylan Layton come on, and he was talking about introducing agile practices into waterfall environments, and he said, you know, there's ways that you can talk about a retrospective is where he was going, but there's ways that you can talk about that so that it seems, because in itself a retrospective is a great thing. It's an opportunity for you guys to get together and learn together. But you don't have to do that at the end. And in fact, in Agile, they do that, you know, iteratively.
Yeah.
So I am reminded of that, but I am also reminded of, you know, when you are identifying ways that you can avoid failure, that many times will open the doors to other opportunities for you to do. And if you set aside learning, if you opt not to do that, then you also opt not to potentially take advantage of opportunities that you would have had by learning. So even though that learn from the past to address the future is at the end, it's not meant to do it only at the end. You should just do that throughout. So there you go. That's my 2 cents. Well, let's see. We are doing great on time. How about we take a few questions from our audience today? So let's see. So don't forget, if you've got questions, you can put those in the Q&A box. So this first question is from Leanne. How do you convince stakeholders that taking the time to look at how things work now is important? So Emily, this is going to go back to our current state question. Some people in our organization feel it's a complete waste of time. I think this question underscores what we were talking about.
And I'm going to respond to a question with a question. Have you asked why they feel like it's a waste of time? Because we can come up with rebuttals all the time. But if we're not hitting the right rebuttal, they're not listening to us. So for me, it's a question of going back and saying, okay, why do you feel that way? And every once in a while, there's a legitimate reason. You know, it's like, we're not even going to continue with anything that remotely resembles this tool in the future. So it's not a useful exercise. Then if you can still come up with but did you think about this aspect of it? Maybe that changes the situation. I would go back and start with the question, why? Why do they feel that way?
Yeah.
Yeah, I love that, Tamara. It's reminding me too that, yeah, we can throw a bunch of reasons at people. And I think everyone in here, we can probably think of like, oh, here's a laundry list of reasons why we need to look at current state first. But coming back to the human element of things. So people are often the best thing, but sometimes also the most challenging thing about making these changes. And there's something that's making that person specifically ask that question. So the why is really important, and being able to address that specific need that they have or the specific concern that they have is probably going to save you both a lot of time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And sometimes you need allies, because sometimes the person asking that question is, you know, up the chain, and you need to call in some allies to help you on that. Okay, so Imtiaz, I think I'm going to pass this question to you. While brainstorming, would it be a good idea to do market analysis and maybe try finding out what your competitors or market leaders are doing to fill the gap that you are currently having? So this goes back to thinking about the future.
So I'll make it told off here, but there's a technique in design thinking called NABC, which is needs, assumptions, benefits, and competition. Essentially, for every idea that comes your way in any brainstorming session, going back and challenging the team as well as the person whose idea it is, those four kind of headings. But I take competition to be right. The competitors, the general market conditions, and maybe any other external kind of factors that may influence the value in the idea. So absolutely, an idea just can't be, I think it's a good idea, therefore it's going to be number one.
Yeah, that's right. I am doing, because I'm a little bit of a nerd, I am doing some research. ISO has just put out a new standard on idea management, and they talk about uncertainty being one of those things that you need to assess before you decide if something is a really good idea or not. So so I think there are tons of techniques in this category that you could be thinking about in order to think about the future, but also assess if it is truly a thing that you should be worried about. And we touched on that today. So any other thoughts on that question? We'll move on to the next. All right. So Aparna actually is asking a similar question. Under assess and analyze, could benchmarking and market analysis, could those also be other ways that you think about the future? And I think they could be. What do you guys think about that? We touched on market analysis a little bit. What do you think about benchmarking?
Yes, and neither of them are techniques that I use extensively. I have no training in the nonprofit sector. I have a bachelor's in interior design and an MBA, and then I worked for a mutual fund company for like 12 years. So me getting into the nonprofit sector was a dream come true, but I have no training in it whatsoever. I heavily depend on my colleagues to inform me and educate me, and I use that internally to say, where do I go to get this information? And they will have it. So I think it's a great idea to rely on them from other parts of my organization. There is, now that I've been in here in this sector a couple of years, I know now that there are a few organizations where I can begin to do research. And I'm just trying to figure out how to do that. Still, it's not a thing that I do on a daily basis. I rely on my partners in my business teams to help with that.
Yeah. I think marketing, customer teams are really good for that.
Absolutely.
And we're lucky in the world of the internet, right? You can find so many benchmarking studies on usability, on accessibility, on whatever it is you're doing, right? There's generally some good content out there that we can begin to use, even if not from a official paid source, right? There is information out there. And analogies is another good one, right? What works well in a different industry or in your previous company, and how can we use maybe a technique or an innovation or an idea from a different sector, and how could that apply to the problem I'm currently facing at work?
So I have a couple of thoughts here. Again, in the spirit of International Failure Day, so Tamara was a interior design major. I was a film major in college. Imtiaz, what did you study in college?
Politics.
There you go. Emily, how about you? What was your major?
I studied business, but I started out as a developer. And then I just realized I needed to talk to people more. Voila.
You needed more people time. So I guess so what I want to point out there is that I think most people don't just one day go, I want to be a business analyst, and they just jump right into it. We all come with these very different backgrounds into this. And, I find people that move into this profession are pretty scrappy. So something like failure, not a big deal. That's actually kind of the challenge that they were looking for. So that's my first thought there. But my second thought is that, there are 50 techniques in the business analysis body of knowledge, and it is very common that we don't use them all, either because that's just not something that we do in our particular domain, or it's just not something that we gravitate towards. So on that note, Tamara, what is your go-to technique?
I am a huge advocate of activity diagrams. Like I said, process. I am big on process analysis, and I am big on gap analysis. What do we need it to do that it doesn't already do? So those are my two big go-tos.
Yeah, Imtiaz, what's your go-to technique?
I'm going to choose one from an IT lens. Data model. It's the first thing I do. First thing I draw up, and it helps me to think about rules and requirements and everything else. And I guess on a business perspective, context diagram and maybe a rich picture.
Okay, Emily, what's your technique of choice?
Can be hard to narrow it down, but I guess if I'm acting as a business analysis or a business analyst, and what do we need to do next? User story mapping, I love. Helps with prioritization, it's visual. And then someone mentioned in the chat also for thinking about processes. So lately I've been more of a process analyst and trying to lean them out. Value stream mapping is so useful. And it's funny because it's one of those kind of like a user story map. I'm up with the thing, but everyone's like, oh yeah, obviously this is how it works, but it might take an entire day to get there. And the value is really in just people talking through these things and understanding them together.
And so I think it's important, for those folks that are listening in today, that there's lots of techniques out there, and sometimes the technique that you first pick might be the one you're most comfortable with. I've been watching the chat, and I'm going to paraphrase Steve Jones. So he's actually another chapter leader. He's up in, I think, Hartford, Connecticut, and he talked about using them off-label. If we think about, pharmaceuticals, they talk about off-label uses. And so I think you can use some of these techniques in different ways. So don't be afraid to go, I'm thinking maybe this technique could be used, but I don't know, I'm going to give it a try. Try it. If you're comfortable with it, I bet you will find that it is the right technique to use. All right. Back to the questions. We've got a little more time. Okay, so this question is from Eugene. I'm seeing a lot of overlap with change management concepts coming through today, which is not unusual in his experience as a BA. Let's see. What's your take on, things are bouncing around here. I think I'm actually asking, this is Varun's question. What's your take on how the BA role blends in with change analyst roles? Any experience there?
Because of the big project that I've been talking about that's been coming for the last 3 years, this whole thing kicked off March 2020. While we were all panicking about lockdowns, we were also going, hey guys, we're going to obsolete this old CRM system and we're going to go bounce everybody to Dynamics. We brought in a vendor. Congratulations, all this is happening at once. And we optimistically thought it was all going to be done within 2 years. We are now in year 3 and it's not done yet. So having said all that, change management has been absolutely critical to keep everybody enthusiastic and engaged. And so learning change management principles, ADCAR, getting involved with the other organization, ACMP, getting some expertise in change management. In our case, we got a consultant to help us with it, and getting the right people on board early has really kept us strong. At a time when other business process reengineering efforts fail because they've just dragged on too long, we still have buy-in and enthusiasm from the rest of the organization. So we must be doing something right.
Yeah.
Now, I'm also going to say hashtag nonprofit people are different. We just are nicer people all the way around. But even for that, I could have easily anticipated a lot of people just giving up by this time, and they're not. We found our champions. That's a big thing in change management, finding your champions, finding your advocates, keeping the messaging going, showing incremental progress, which is why Agile is great, because you have things you can show them. No, we're not all the way there, but we're a little farther than we were last week. All of that feeds into it. Okay, I'm shutting up now.
That's all right. You may have seen me. I made a Venn diagram with my hands. You probably didn't know what that means because you're not in my head. But yeah, a BA has got to be a change analyst. Like so there are definitely things we can learn, specialization. So ProSci has awesome information on that. But I'm realizing with this process change work that I'm doing, I need to be less optimistic. How about this? I need to be more realistic with how ready people are for the changes that I want them to make. So super important. And me wanting this change to happen, me wanting things to be more agile or more whatever it is, doesn't matter if people aren't ready for it, and if they don't have the time and the mental space for it, and if they're not bought in. I'll stop now too. We could go on all day. We won't.
All righty. Okay, so now Eugene's question. Actually, you know what? Yeah, regarding the thinking about what could go wrong, how do you deal with stakeholders who are stating that everything can go wrong, nothing will work, because there's just an attitude of failure already present in your organization? Oh my gosh. Have you guys worked in one of those organizations where everything's bad?
That's one of those stakeholders in change management that you go to that person and you understand why they feel that way. When I first came to Children International, I was working with people who said, we've been there, done that, got the t-shirt. And I said they tended to armadillo up. And what I mean by that is when they were faced with something that, this was the new bright idea of the moment, they would curl up like a roly-poly or like an armadillo, and they would just armor up, and they're like, okay, I've been here for 30 years. I'm just going to wait this out. This person will leave and we'll go back to the way things were before, and it'll be fine, right? I didn't understand that at first, and I thought it was a blocker. And the more I got to know these people and the more I got to know this organization, the more I realized where all that came from and that they had legitimate reasons for feeling the way that they did. So it wasn't until I really started understanding the why and the what went wrong that led them to have those battle scars that I could really talk to them on a human level and say, but I think this time it's going to be different, and here's why. And sometimes that works and sometimes that doesn't. You can't win them all. But that's part of that stakeholder management, is understanding the why behind the way they feel.
Yeah, really great point. All right, I think we are technically out of time. I know. So here's what we're going to do, because you guys have all given links for upcoming events at your respective chapters. So we will make sure that when you guys get your follow-up email from us, that you get you get the links for the upcoming Kansas City events, the Cleveland events, and also the UK events. They've got one tomorrow. You don't want to miss out on the Brown Bag Fridays. They are amazing from what I have heard. I want to thank everybody for joining us today. I hope you got a lot out of this, and we really look forward to seeing you soon. Take care, you guys. Thanks, you guys, for giving your time this afternoon. You've been such a great panel of speakers. Thanks.
Thank you,
I know,
everyone.
super hard. Bye, everyone.
Okay.
Bye-bye.